we've been going through the Brave Space Litany, I can't help but remember Paul's word in 1 Corinthians from chapter 12 to 14, which creates one framework to talk about what does it mean to grow? What does it mean to become the sacred and blessed community? In the middle of 13, which we most often hear around weddings about the promise of love, which is rooted in community, he says in 13:10 that when the wholeness comes in, that we'll stop being like children, but we'll become adults. The term of wholeness here, completeness, is telos. And we don't notice it unless we get to play with original languages. But Paul makes another allusion to that in 14, to where in 14:20, he says, I desire you not to be infants in your mind, but to be infants in your concept of evil, but now become mature. Again, it says telos, become whole, become mature, become complete within the community. So that whatever we talk about and do and move through, whatever we're doing with framing Brave Space, it's this act of calling ourselves into maturity, which is why today's words are so important. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. So we have that promise, like Paul did with the people in Corinth, saying, you guys need to come, you need to come out and start where you're at. Start in their hostility, their factions. They're saying, we're ranking what spiritual giftings are. Start with your side, your group, your tribe, trying to become one people. You have a right to start somewhere, but you have a responsibility to continue the process towards maturity. So as we think of who we are, what it means to start embracing Brave Space, as we think about what it means to be Christian and to grow in our faith and understanding, we want these words of Paul to echo through our mind as we read the litany. We are letting go of childish things which look like division and backbiting. We're letting go of faction absolute holds on knowledge that says my perspective is the only one. And we're growing into a maturity that creates space for more types of humanity to be present. And then this is the promise of maturity, as Paul names it. This has always been one of the most provocative parts of the Brave Space Litany to me because it doesn't allow complacency. I know throughout my life, I've desired to come to that final answer. And that final answer means I've arrived somewhere, I've gotten complete. So I don't have to stress to learn to adapt anymore. But this becomes a perpetual state of being within our litany that we have a right to start somewhere. And each week that new somewhere starts again. We come in and we come into the space and say, today I'm starting from here, but I'm dedicated to growing. Today, I will examine what I think I know because all of my assumptions that help me understand and predict life may be flawed and come at other people's well-being and flourishing. So it puts me into this perpetual state of re-examining, re-knowing, and trying to move towards maturity that is super uncomfortable because I can never just rest in the idea that I figured it out yesterday. So I'm on my way. I'm not just starting again. But I think this one really calls me to be in a perpetual state of starting again and examining what I think I know so I can move towards maturity, towards growth, and towards community.
Glenn, thanks for the for setting that up and also your reflection. Uh, this today, what's standing out to me is the word right. I feel an openness here. Like there's a sense of being open minded, open hearted, open handed, if you will. But this notion of a right is something that, at least in the American context, right? There's this notion that this is a God given either claim that you have or an authority that you have. It's something that can't be taken away. This idea that I have a right to start wherever I am. Like, and no one can take that away. Like, I don't have to wish I was somewhere else. I don't have to feel bad about being where I am. I can actually just claim, like, this is where I am. And to get to this growth, there's sometimes sometimes you find yourself wanting to be somewhere else, but you are where you are. I'm like, sometimes I just have to pray that I'm willing I just have the desire to be somewhere else because I can't move right now. Like I am where I am. I want to be there someday, but today I just can't. And so there's an openness here. I feel love here. To me, that's a sign of maturity that you don't have to beat yourself up because you are where you are. But it's the invitation to not stay there. That if you can accept that you are where you are, that we are where we are, even as a community, that then there's a responsibility. And then that to me implies some kind of action and taking on some responsibility and ownership to move from where I am to somewhere else. So yeah, there's just an openness there. I appreciate the growing into maturity. And we all have a right to be who we are, right where we are. And that's okay. And that's okay.
Yeah, I know for myself, just as I've been thinking about that refrain from the litany that we share each week, um, like the word right is always connected to the start somewhere. But how I've been thinking about it is almost like we have a right to continue to grow as well. And I just look back at my own trajectory and like we all have our quirks. We all have the things that are about us that when we're in our healthiest places are really good things, but when we're not in our healthiest places are really toxic. And for me, like that, like one of my traits in that is that I love to help people achieve their possibility and what's put like their potential and to step in and live in all of that. But in my unhealthiest place, I'm an Enneagram 4 and envy sets in. Um, and I've seen that happen over and over and over again in different things that I've been involved in from the time when I was rapping and started a record label. And all of a sudden I found myself competing with the artists on our record label instead of encouraging them. And as the record label owner, it was my job to cultivate their potential and possibility and to push, and I never stopped doing that. But as I did it, it was almost like there was this other part of me that was like, oh, but what about you? What about you? What about you? And I think when we're in community, for me personally, like there's always that tension and always that wrestling, and I think that's the place where I know that I start there sometimes. I start showing up, and I feel a little bit fragile. I feel a little bit vulnerable, and I feel like envy is probably a little heavier than other days. But at the same time, as I continue to grow, um, we can acknowledge what's in the car with us. We just don't have to let it drive. And I think that's the continue to grow part for me is that I've learned these things about myself, and that's the even to examine what we think we know. Like my reality doesn't have to be dictated by what I feel in that moment. My reality is actually dictated by what I actually want to see happen, and that's that continue to grow part. And so I begin to shape my reality by what does growth look like? What does healthy growth look like for myself and for my community?
Thanks, Daniel and Carl. That was really good. Um, for me, when I look at this part of the Brave Space litany, I'm always struck by the relationship between the words right and responsibility. That there is this sense that as a human being, as someone who is alive and existing, there are certain rights and graces and allowances that you are given, but it's never completely severed from your responsibility to the next person. It's never severed from your responsibility to your sister and brother, and the ways that your rights impact someone else. Um, and I think for me, in the Christian tradition I grew up in, it was very much um, I was taught that truth is something that's very black and white, that you can have all the answers to, and you have to hold on to that firm beliefs that don't change, and that is the sign of a faithful Christian. That is the sign of someone who's truly living out their faith, someone who's held on to their beliefs without changing throughout their life. Um, and I think as I started to grow and deconstruct my faith and grow from that tradition, I realized how dangerous that is because you never allow yourself the space to examine the ways that your faith may be harming someone else, or the you basically say that I have all of the answers to all of life's problems. I have the the market cornered essentially on what reality is, what faith is, what life is, and that in that you end up silencing other voices by just when you double down on the fact that have I understand what is real, I know what truth is, in that you essentially silence everybody else's experience, and you never give yourself the space to examine the ways that your beliefs could harm someone else. So I think as I've deconstructed my faith, to the tradition I came from, it seems like a slipping away or a falling away because I've learned to hold my faith with open hands, knowing that things can come in and out, knowing that I am not the only person. My voice is not the only one that's needed to understand what is true and what is real. So I think that for me, growth in faith has been the ability to realize that um, that my ability to understand truth is always needing to be evaluated and seen in how it impacts others, and that my rights are never severed from my responsibility to look at the ways that what I believe and what I see as truth is how it's affecting and impacting others.
I really appreciated where Megan went with the idea that she had inherited a way of understanding faith, that the goal, the absolute pinnacle, was static. That if you can get to that right answer in the first year, you never have to worry, you never have to change. You have to just hold on as tight as you can to that one absolute truth. But embracing this notion that we all have a right, which is a community right, not just an individual right, to become where we are. But we have a community responsibility as well as the individual responsibility to start becoming who we could be. That she moved us towards what maturity looked like in the inherited belief, which was static, to what we're trying to say at FOS, what maturity will look like for us, which is dynamic and situated within community. As she said, which has our rights that never sever us from responsibility to each other. So I really thought that was a profound push to be able to say, like, wherever you came in, however you've understood faith coming here, we don't demand that you start echoing any one of us. We just demand that you start looking at what you've inherited and ask, is this the best way to create flourishing life around you? Has it benefited, brought the fruits of life that you hoped for within you? Or are you just white knuckling it, holding on as tight as you can? Because if that's the case, we have the promise here that you have the right to show up like that, but you have the gift of a responsibility to grow with the hope that we move towards a community maturity that has room for us all.
No, like there are bits and pieces that I'm hearing in all of your sharing. But what's coming to me right now is the need to establish, for me, I'm saying this for myself personally, and then I also think this needs to happen in community, but it's to establish a rhythm that allows me to start where I am, right, and owning that, like not apologizing for that, and the openness, as Megan was talking about, deconstructing what I have, but not to necessarily throw it out, but to understand it, right? To diagnose it, what's there, what's good, what's problematic, right? And then to reconstruct something else. And it seems like as I'm thinking about as myself as an individual, the way I go about the day, I like to meditate and get my mind and heart and life ready for whoever I'm going to encounter, right? But it seems like maybe the first or second person I encounter, I forget all that stuff that I planned in my meditation or in my prayer or whatever I was reading. And I get like I'm kind of, I don't know if I'm like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole, but I can end up in all kinds of places. And you've got me thinking about the need to, if that happens, and it happens to me a lot, at the end of the day, needing to do some sort of inventory. I may need to deconstruct everything I thought I knew at the beginning of the day, and asking for and needing and looking for and examining that and looking for a way forward for the next day. Because what I'll do is I'll just ignore it all. If I didn't like it, I just avoid it. I try to forget it, delete it. But there's stuff there that I need. There's stuff there that I need to take into the next day. There's stuff there that my community needs. And there's definitely stuff there I need to leave in the past. So So the rhythm piece is what's hitting me right now. This need to deconstruct, the need to diagnose, and then the need to reconstruct. Um, that's what I'm feeling from that. And I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of to process with you all.
No, thank you, Daniel, for your processing. And and I think what Daniel speaks on is actually just a great reminder for our community why we practice the examine together. Why, at the end of the day, we come together to spend, not like individually, but collectively as a community. This is a practice that we do where we spend 5 minutes just unpacking the day with some questions that we prayerfully go through so that we can write down and examine that what we think we know stuff at the end of the day. So that when we move into the next day, we already have processing in place that allows us to do that constructive work, that reconstructive work as we go into the next day. And so just like I think that what Daniel was saying is just such a great reminder for why we have that practice in this community and why we live into that and live out of that practice as well. And for me, I would just wanted to say that like there was two lines or two ideas that came forward, one from Daniel and one from Megan that really stood out to me. And it was Daniel's the grace to start wherever you are, and that that you have a right to start wherever you are, and that like nobody can demand that you start from somewhere different, even though it's interesting, like in the same way that I still think in America, like within America and with around the world, we're still fighting for human rights, basic human rights for people. So it's a right to start wherever you are, but it's not a right that unfortunately people are automatically giving you. And so you have to fight for that right to start wherever you are. And I think FOS is that community where it's like the rebel forces in Star Wars, where we are fighting for the rights for you to start wherever you are. When you show up at the table of Christ, there's always a space for you at the table of Christ. And it doesn't matter that you don't have to show up in a certain particular way. You show up at the table from the place that you are starting. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's the rights. But then going into what Megan said about rights and responsibilities is that even when you look at like a charter of rights, the Bill of Rights, those Bill of Rights actually come with responsibilities. No matter what country you're in, no matter what place you're in, when you write a Bill of Rights, it's also a set of responsibilities. And when we see the breakdown, when people only want their rights, but they don't want their responsibilities, it's what we see happening in America right now with like the Second Amendment, right? I have a right to own a gun, but you have a responsibility to preserve life. And no one wants to do the responsibility part. And so as we show up in community, we have a right to start wherever we are, but we have a responsibility then to examine what we think we know. So we can't show up and say, well, this is where I'm at, right? It's like we have to hold that with open hands and in a humble way that says, this is where I'm starting, but I'm open to re-examine all of this. So those are some things that kind of came to mind as I was reflecting on what was said.
That's really awesome, Carl. I like that idea of a bill of responsibilities, like side by side with a bill of rights. I think that'd be really cool to look at. For me, one thing that just kind of I noticed a physical response in my body as Daniel was sharing, and just especially at the end when he's saying that it was okay. Like, it's okay that you can show up just as you are. It's okay that you're starting where you are. And just there was almost like this breath of or a sigh of relief that like it's okay that I am where I am. And I think of course, we want to continue to have this responsibility to grow and to be better, and to create a better space and world for all of us. But I think that sometimes that pressure, I think, can be intimidating, and it can be a frightening thing, especially when you're uh, doing what humans do and you start to get nervous and scared of the unknown, of something that you're not familiar or comfortable with. And I think just it's a great reminder for all of us, that to have that grace and compassion on both ourselves and others, to say that it's okay. In the same breath that I'm asking, where do we need to go? What does a better, more just world look like? I can tell myself it's okay. you're okay and we're okay. And I think that just allows for more space for us to be human as we're growing. And I think if we can continue to also, instead of asking ourselves, where are we going, saying, where am I, to saying, okay, it's okay to be where I am, but where am I? Taking that time to identify that piece as well, I think will allow you the space to show up as your full self. And then as you do that, I feel like there's just this natural turn with how can I help others show up as their full selves. And I think that sort of permission to be human is contagious. And you'll want that to grow for the people that you love. And then you want that to grow in your communities. So I think that it's good to also remember as we're pushing ourselves to grow, to take that breath, to let your body relax and say, it's okay to be where I am. And to ask yourself, where am I? And then to allow yourself and others permission to be human in this process.
As we come to a close, wanted to highlight what I heard in the voices. Today, we have witnessed a common theme of the right to start somewhere, which looks like showing up as yourself authentically and open to re-examining life, faith, and community. The right is tied to our responsibility to ourselves and each other. We will grow into a community who can become more human as we reimagine faith together so that yesterday doesn't predict what tomorrow will be. This naturally creates a touch of anxiety in everyone, but it also holds the promise of new life for each person. And in light of that, just as a way to develop our conversations, I want to do a book recommendation because what's FOS if we don't expand your reading list? John Cobb is a process theologian who wrote on grace and responsibility, which is just a full book outlining what we talked about today, with that you have a right to start somewhere, but a responsibility to grow, which is understood for him as there's the grace of God to be who you are in the community and present, but we have responsibility to each other to develop a more life-giving way forward. So if you need something to read over the weekend, here we go.